Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel. Few movie moments capture the thrill of archaeology quite like the opening scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. We have Indiana Jones with his dusty hat, pushing through vines into a forgotten cavern, dodging booby traps to uncover an ancient treasure. Sure, that's Hollywood, but at its core, it speaks to something real, the adventure of piecing together the past to better understand our present. That's a feeling you get at Tel Maresha and Beit Guvrin. At Beit Guvrin, history isn't just displayed, it's buried, layered, and waiting to be uncovered. Above ground, you'll find ruins of a once thriving Hellenistic city. Orderly streets, public buildings, an acropolis dating back to biblical times. But go below the surface and a second city emerges, one carved into soft chalk, an underground maze of workshops, cisterns, and storerooms that actually feel more like a hidden world than a historical site. In this episode of Wandering Jews, Scott and I are digging deep, literally and figuratively, into what makes this place more than just another archaeological site. Because at Beit Guvrin, history isn't something you look at from behind a rope. It's something you step into, get your hands dirty with, and maybe even take home with you, not as an artifact, but an actual change in perspective.
At Maresha and Beit Guvrin, you can't avoid thinking of Indiana Jones and humming a quick phrase from that iconic musical score. Dun, da, dun, 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 da, da. And I remember when I was guiding with the crew at archaeological seminars, when I was at a different stage in my life, that music very often accompanied me going down into the caves and crawling around. When you descend from the area of the Tel, once this proud, fortified acropolis of a city whose history really goes all the way back to the time of the Bible, Second Temple, the Roman amphitheater, Crusader church, Muslim period quarries, you really discover two cities, above and below. One city where people lived, the marketplaces, obviously the views all around, the shops, the public buildings, organized into neat city blocks. And then the second city, hidden from view, buried in the ground, a massive maze of rock-cut caves in the soft chalk, basements, industrial zones, storage. And so it really is an unusual and very eye-opening site to have the privilege to visit.
It's mind-blowing. And, when we think about history, we think of archaeology specifically, we think of it at arm's length, right? You read through signs, you can imagine looking through a glass case.
Don't go beyond this line.
Exactly,
don't touch the glass.
Exactly. Trying to conjure up, trying to imagine the world that once was. But in the soft hills of the Judean lowlands, just about an hour away from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, you don't just learn about history, you touch it, you uncover it, you become part of it. The Dig for a Day at Tel Maresha gives you that rare opportunity to step into the shoes of an archaeologist. It's not a staged reenactment or a kids-friendly sandbox. You're literally handling real artifacts from real ancient homes. We're talking about pottery shards, bone tools, oil lamps, maybe even a seal impression that hasn't seen the light of day in over 2 millennia. You dig, you sift, you wonder. Every handful of earth holds a story, and you're the one uncovering it. There's something really quite profound about brushing dust off a piece of the past and realizing you're the first person to touch it in 2,000 years. So we can agree, Scott, that it goes beyond the realm of the educational, it becomes something deeply human. And that's quite humbling. It stays with you long after you've washed the dirt off your hands.
Definitely. I mean, when you think about people getting their hands dirty, so if we take a step back, the British duo Bliss and McAllister, they were the archaeologists who arrived at Tel Maresha in the last part of the 19th century. They were armed with shovels, and they were just super curious, what was this place? And they plunged into the heart of the Tel, peeling back the layers of time that had covered up the long-forgotten city. For 2 years, they devoted themselves to piecing together the stories of Maresha and chronicling its hidden legacy. Decades drifted by, the Tel returned to sleep. Bliss and McAllister obviously had left other events took over, and there was no work there for many, many decades. But the legacy or the whispers of Bliss and McAllister, they lingered. And their records, their notebooks, left open a lot of unanswered questions for archaeologists who followed in their footsteps. About a century after Bliss and McAllister, Israeli archaeologists, among them Amos Kloner, arrived in Tel Maresha in the 1970s and the 1980s. And for more than a decade, Amos and the teams of archaeological seminars meticulously charted the subterranean labyrinth that snaked all beneath the surface, revealing the veins of a city carved in stone.
So you talk about Bliss and McAllister paving the way for Kloner in the late 1980s, right? So at that point, the archaeological seminars led by Bernie Alpert and Ian Stern, who, Scott, you're actually going to be talking to, that paved the way for yet another new period of exploration and excavation at Maresha. They also pioneered and established, as we were just talking about, the Dig for a Day program, bringing thousands of people every season to participate in excavations. It really appeals to families, right, across the board, to discover the thrill of history and contribute to the internationally recognized work that is reconstructing the ancient story of the city of Maresha and its neighboring Beit Guvrin. From the 1980s, they continued the thrilling descent into the Earth's embrace, each swing of the pickaxe unearthing fresh clues to the lives and times of those who once walked the now silent streets. What wonders are we talking about that were unearthed? A breathtaking realm beneath the surface, a sprawling network of man-made caves, a hidden city mirroring the one above. Quarries whose stone was hewn, cisterns that once held life-giving water, ingenious olive presses that squeezed the bounty of the land, mysterious ritual baths, and the silent sentinels of dovecotes. Archaeologists even uncovered the final resting places of ancient inhabitants, their stories preserved in stone. Imagine the bustling marketplaces and the lively chatter of its inhabitants. The thrill of uncovering thousands of bullae, tiny clay seals, bearing the imprints of long-lost officials, and even the images of forgotten gods. Picture the satisfaction of piecing together intricate machinery of ancient olive production, and the playful mystery of hundreds of astragali, the knuckle bones used for games and perhaps even divination.
At this point, when you go to Tel Maresha, again, it's hard to imagine that once it was a totally buried site. It's now a major Israeli national park. It's a UNESCO International Heritage Site, and recognized also through scholarship that's being written about the various groups, including the Jews who lived in the area, and the impressive city that they built all through the centuries. One of the issues we'll be talking about with Ian Stern, the inter-ethnic relations in Second Temple period Israel, and sometimes things that really are eye-opening about the dialogue and the diversity of the area and the way that Jews interacted with their non-Jewish neighbors. The story isn't just etched in stone, it's not fossilized. It's an ongoing adventure, and it really waits for each new hand to come and brush away the dust and reveal another piece of this fascinating puzzle.
Absolutely. It's living and breathing. I mean, if we think about it, we're in 2025 now. So we're talking about 45 years ago, roughly. And what's been uncovered in such a relatively short amount of time, we're tracing it back. It's quite phenomenal. And the Maresha area itself, right, you were talking about it, like an enormous Swiss cheese. It's riddled with thousands of caverns and basements. And I think the recent estimates counted almost 3,500 carved caverns. About 10% of that total have been excavated through the years. So you can actually reach these caves by going down exposed ancient stairwells and modern metal stairs, extending tens of feet below the surface, if you can picture that. Unexcavated caves and recently open caves for excavation, you sometimes have to crawl through them. You're going to get down on your hands and knees to slide through openings, sometimes no wider than the circumference of a toilet seat. Archaeologists even have used ropes on occasion to lower themselves down into the small openings, leading into larger underground systems. For example, when winter rains move soil and debris to open up openings that the previous season were still unknown.
As you go into this world below, you also step back into history, into ancient times, and the expansive columbarium basements that were used for raising pigeons for food and for ritual purposes. It's basically the size of a modern subway station. These water cisterns plastered all around with these gorgeous and very usable still today spiral staircases. They display how life was possible in an area with very little rain on the edge of the desert, even in ancient times. The Heliodorus stele. A stele, a large stone tablet, and this particular one, it provides clues to the politics of the region on the eve of the Maccabean revolt and the background of the story of Hanukkah.
Wow.
You can see the sections of the Heliodorus stele in the Israel Museum today alongside other pieces in the Antiquities area of the museum that are brought from Beit Guvrin and from Tel Maresha. Within the painted chambers of the what are called the Sidonian tombs, vibrant depictions of creatures, both real and imagined. There were remnants here of a community, very cosmopolitan, that once thrived in Tel Maresha, roughly 2,200, 2,300 years ago. And when you go into their tombs, you're blown away. A wealthy family burial cave colored with multicolored wall paintings and a parade of animals, both zoological and mythological.
Between the individual tomb niches, you can see a Greek inscription that actually hints at what might be a rather juicy love affair. And although the hot flesh has been reduced to dust after 2,200 years, the memory of romance remains. One summer day in 1902, American theologian John Peters and German classical scholar Hermann Thiersch arrived at Tel Maresha in search of the city mentioned as the hometown of Micha the prophet and in the Second Temple Chronicles of Josephus. In their initial mapping survey of the area, they discovered a rock-cut entrance, largely covered by heavy thorny branches and collapsed earth, and slowly edged their way into a multi-chambered cavern complete with broad chalk-hewn staircases.
At one end of the largest room in this cave, there's a large stone niche with a pointed archway. Along the side walls, two lines of similar caves, each one slightly larger than the length of an adult human. These tomb caves, a family tomb site on the outskirts of Maresha, belong to a wealthy dynasty of Sidonian, the city of Sidon, Lebanese merchants. They were likely involved in the bustling commercial trade between the fertile agricultural area of the Judean hills and the northern Negev and the goods that are offered in Hellenistic cities all along the Lebanese coast and even beyond. The Sidonian tombs, again, they're covered with painted portraits of tens of animals. The paintings that can be viewed in the cave today are careful reconstructions done by contemporary archaeological artists, but they are based very clearly on the paintings that have been photographed by Peters and Thiersch and their crew in 1902.
Crocodiles from the Nile and from the Crocodile River near the Menashe Heights and the Carmel Coast, lions from the Arabian Desert and the wilderness of Judea, porcupines, giraffes wander the cave walls. 4 out of the famous safari Big Five, lions, leopards, hippos, and rhinos, are depicted in the tomb. Interestingly, only the buffalo are omitted.
I feel bad for the buffalo.
Poor buffaloes.
We'll have to go on a real safari in order to find them.
Yes. And then we're also dealing with mythological beasts, right? We've got the manticore, a lion-like creature with a human face and a scorpion's tail. Griffin, part lion, part eagle, the king of the earth and the sky. Cerberus, the 3-headed hound, said by the ancient Greeks to guard the gates of hell.
And most prominently displayed, alongside the largest tomb niche at the head of the cave, stands with wings outstretched 2 enormous birds of prey, representing the mythical phoenix. We know the phoenix from, I hate to say it, the movies and the books of Harry Potter. But even before Harry Potter...
Slightly before,
the phoenix was mentioned both in the book of Job and in the Talmud. And the Midrash describes, rabbinic writing describes the phoenix as Of HaChol. Eve, according to ancient Jewish literature, gave the cattle, the beasts, and the birds to eat of all of the fruit of the garden. All obeyed her and ate from that fruit, except a certain bird called Oph Hachol, our friend the phoenix. In Job 29:18, then I said, I shall die with my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the phoenix. The school of Rabbi Yanai, one of the rabbis of the Talmud, offered, the phoenix lives 1,000 years, at the end of which a fire issues forth from its nest and burns it up. Yet a small piece the size of an egg is left, and it grows new limbs and lives again. Other rabbis of that same period, it lives 1,000 years, at the end of which its body is consumed and its wings drop off. Yet a small piece the size of an egg is left, whereupon it grows new limbs and lives again. In Genesis Rabbah in 19:5. Throughout the Hellenistic world and in Jewish culture and later in Christianity, the phoenix was a symbol of immortality and of resurrection. And it could be that in the tomb cave of the Sidonians at Tel Maresha, one phoenix is the phoenix about to die, and the second one, the phoenix rising reborn from its own ashes.
So as we're leaving the tombs and we're going back up the broad stair through the opening covered by thorn bushes and fig branches, let's go back to that juicy Greek inscription, which I'll read from. There is nothing left I could do for you or anything that will give you pleasure. I lay with another, but I love you, the one most dear to me. In the name of Aphrodite, I am glad of one thing, that I have your coat for collateral. But I flee and leave you to your freedom. Do as you will. Do not bang on the wall. The noise is heard inside. We will signal each other with movements. Let this be our signal. So in 1902, the archaeologist Peter Zintiesh thought the inscription was a sign of a secret tryst. It's evidently erotic and appears to give us a glimpse into an ancient romance they wrote. A maiden has written on the door of the tomb a message to the lover, whom alone she really loves, to arrange for further intercourse between them, which is henceforth possible only in the sign language of nods and becks. The spacious tomb, as yet quite or almost unused outside of the city, must have been a convenient rendezvous for lovers. Here in the twilight shadows they may have waited for one another on the benches, and while they waited, scribbled all sorts of signs on the wall.
Peter Zintiesh had a very rich imagination, which is maybe very important for any archaeologist.
I think so.
So there are other archaeologists who suggest that the lines could be from like a lost Greek poem. Maybe it was even a popular song and it's more of a quote.
Interesting.
It's possible. Think about today. Maybe someone would leave on a gravestone or next to a grave their favorite verse from a Springsteen or a Dylan tune, or a verse from Chaim Guri or from Chava Alberstein. Maybe it's a similar kind of an idea, this idea of expanding our spirit by bringing in inspirational words from other places. Another option, which is offered by an archaeologist named Avner Ecker from Bar-Ilan University, he gives a slightly different twist to this ancient inscription and what it might mean. And what I like about it is it really humanizes these ancient peoples, in some ways bringing them to life, because it points to how similar we all are.
Nice. The universality.
The universality, burying the dead, having the ceremonies, leaving a memory in stone, mourning, and dealing with these ultimate questions 2,300 years ago and us today. And his reading offers the following. The dead man said to his living lover, quote, I lie with another, death, though loving you greatly. The woman to her dead lover, quote, but by Aphrodite, of one thing I'm very glad, that your cloak remains with me because you are not here. The dead man, but I run away, and to you I leave behind plenty of space. Do what you will. And the dead man continues, don't beat the wall out of mourning. Don't be upset or angry. There's nothing more to do.
Wow.
And interpreted in this way, maybe the poem is about grief, about loss, about coming to grips with death. Again, archaeology, as you suggested much earlier, it's not only about, the broken pieces and the sifting. It's about recreating, retelling the lives of people who you discover little by little, piece by piece, so to speak, They weren't that different than we are.
And, apropos broken, like the broken pieces of themselves, like, as we deal with mourning and parts of ourselves that are left behind. Visiting the Sidonian tomb isn't just gorgeous, right? It's not just visually stunning. It's, like you said, it's a journey into the lives and the fundamental questions of our shared human experience. So ideally, all visits to archaeological sites and sites in general encourage us, invite us to move beyond observing relics of the deceased to bringing their stories to life, encouraging us to recognize our profound connections with people who at first glance we assume are very different. But through digging, we can actually tap into parts that resonate quite strongly with us.
Yeah, for sure. I think participating in archaeology and the study of history and, walking the land, so to speak, it isn't just about what you find in the ground. It's about what you take with you when you leave. You walk away with kind of a new vision, the ability to see layers beneath the surface of things, a city, a landscape, even a conversation. You start to wonder what stories lie buried under the everyday, what's actually visible.
Love it. What's beyond the surface. And Tel Maresha may be just one site, but the experience stays with you. It shifts how you think about history, not as something distant or abstract, but as something created by real people whose choices, mistakes, and moments of brilliance echo into today. You don't have to become an archaeologist. But after digging, sorting, and sifting through the past with your own hands, you might just find yourself more curious, which is always a good thing, more connected, and more aware that the present we live in is tomorrow's history in the making.
And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own. So welcome back. Today we have a special guest. As you know, usually on Something for the Road, we host one of our tour educators, one of our travel experts to share their tips and recommendations. Today we're with Dr. Ian Stern. Happy to say, close friend, teacher, and all-around excellent person. And Ian is the head archaeologist at Tel Maresha in the Beit Guvrin area. He's one of the internationally recognized experts on the site and the implications of the digs there. Ian is also an educator, and those who know him as the founder, along with Bernie Alpert, of archaeological seminars, The Dig for a Day. And so really, Ian has spent over 30 years, I can say, walking, digging, crawling the whole area of Tel Maresha. And I'm really, really pleased that Ian is with us today. Ian, how's it going?
Very well, Scott. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you and great to be with you. We started to talk about Tel Maresha, as you know, here on the podcast. I wanted to ask you, we mentioned the Heliodorus stele, this enormous sectioned slabs of stone that were put together after the fact that actually people can see in the Israel Museum. Tell us a little about the process behind discovering the stele. Why is it so important?
Well, first of all, I would say that finding anything with writing on it is an archaeological gold. It is the most important thing because it's not something that requires a lot of guesswork. So when we found the first segment or first portion of this stele, we were very excited, although it was really looking at like a small piece of a larger declaration, and it was difficult to really understand what was said there. We then found a second piece, and I shared this with a friend of mine, Professor Dov Gera, an expert in Greek. And again, we certainly weren't sure where we were going with it. It seemed like maybe an epitaph of some sort, but we were going completely in the wrong direction. With the discovery of the third piece, we already had a hint that maybe it was connected to something that had already been displayed at the Israel Museum. And so I decided to bring our three pieces to the museum to see if it fit together. And when we brought it there, lo and behold, we found a perfect fit. We're still missing portions of it, but we're talking about the largest inscription ever to be found in Israel.
It's literally adult size.
Yes, absolutely. It's written in Greek, and it is basically a takeoff from 2 Maccabees chapter 3. And it's describing a very, very significant event in really the 2nd century BCE when the Seleucid king basically is approaching through his representatives in the area, the city of Maresha, and asking for some more money. In all honesty, he's actually asking for taxes to pay off certain debts they owed to Rome. For the reaction, or at least when we read in the Second Maccabees, this is something that led up to the revolt of the Maccabees, what we talk about in terms of, let's say, the story of Hanukkah. So this is very significant in terms of making connections to the ancient past. It will eventually lead to this revolt, which is a reflection of tensions in the area. And these tensions in the area is not necessarily, let us say, typical of that period of time. Because at that period of time, what I could say, and this is, again, a reflection of what we found in Maresha over the last 30 plus years, more or less a cosmopolitan city that, let us say, the different ethnic groups in this area got along very well. And that's really putting it mildly. I think they interacted and acculturated or assimilated one with the other, borrowing from each other, etc.
So if we take a look at for example, Heliodorus, this governor, Syrian Greek Seleucid, taxes are raised, certain Jews get upset, and this only adds to the anger or frustration of certain sections of the Jewish community of the land of Israel or Judea against the Syrian Greeks, against the Seleucids. If you bring another example, we have an example in Josephus where he talks about a forced conversion later on of the Hasmoneans, descendants of the Maccabees, forcing the people around Maresha, the Idumeans, to convert to Judaism by the sword. So here's two examples of interaction, which is conflict-based. But you're suggesting, wait a second, that's only part of the story. How does Maresha give us another view on Jewish history, which is more about, as you mentioned, that diversity, that interplay, which is not conflict-based necessarily?
Well, what's interesting is everything that I've been finding over the last 30 years suggests that even though Josephus talks about a forced conversion, everything that we find, all the facts on the ground archaeologically, indicate that this was not a forced conversion, but rather a voluntary conversion. I would say perhaps with a little bit of a push, for sure, but nevertheless a voluntary conversion. Or to put it differently, if I look at the facts on the ground, Josephus doesn't say forced conversion. He says except circumcision and the laws of the Jews. And just as an example, we've found over 17 circumcised stone phalli at Maresha. And again, this is something that, let us say, you would not find in a Jewish site because Jews did not make graven images. And it suggests very strongly that the Idumeans practiced circumcision. And this is also backed by evidence that we read in the book of Jeremiah about the Edomites as well. So number one, these people already practiced circumcision. But I'm going beyond that. I can say that, well, we find very few pig bones. So that means that, again, the folks in Maresha were practicing what is referred to as pig avoidance, something that is shared by many different groups within the Levant, the Jews included, and also the Idumeans. Also, I could say that we have over 1,000 vessels that were deliberately punctured. Now, deliberately punctured vessels is something that you will find in Judean sites, but not this early. They will be found in sites from the Roman period. And when we find them in a site like this in a Roman period, it's generally, at least understood by most archaeologists, as representing rules that we see in the Mishnah connected to purity and impurity rules reflected in Mishnah Kelim Bet. Basically, if you had a vessel that became impure, if you punctured it the size of an olive, then it would be purified. Again, this is an ethnic indicator found in a Roman site. It would normally suggest the site was Jewish, but this is found in Maresha, which basically comes to an end in 112 BCE, meaning it is pre-Roman, it is pre-Judean, and yet it is found in a site that is clearly an Idumean site with a majority of Idumean people living there.
So what you're saying essentially is things that we usually identify as Jewish: circumcision, pig avoidance, and piercing of impure vessels. These are actually things that it seems were being practiced by other peoples alongside the Jews. In this example, the Idumean inhabitants of Maresha. So the question then becomes, well, who started it? And who got the idea from who? How did the culture develop, and how did these traditions become adopted into a particular group?
Okay, well, let me give you one last example, and that would be the fact that we found over 60 ritual baths. I'm deliberately not using the term mikveh because these are not what we call Judean mikvaot, but there are no Judean mikvaot this early. We're finding baths that resemble something that was used for some sort of ritual purpose. I cannot say what it was, but basically some ritual took place in these baths, and basically this did not exist yet in Judean sites. Judeans may have gone to purify themselves, but that would have been in a river, in a moving body of water, but they did not have what we might call man-made baths as we see in Maresha. So once again, I'm saying is that when, let's say, the Hasmonean conquest happens, the people of Maresha will continue to do what they were already doing, but they may have changed the symbolism of those acts. I don't know what the symbolism of circumcision was for the Idumeans. Was it a reflection of a covenantal relationship between God and them? I don't know, as it was with the Judeans. Why did they go into a purification exercise with water? I don't know. And the same thing could apply to the other things, whether or not they punctured the vessels for any ritual purpose, or, again, were they avoiding pig for the same reason. I don't know these answers because we do not have a Josephus or a Bible for the Idumeans. What I can say is they were already doing these things, and not only were they already doing it, but after the conquest by the Hasmoneans, and they're absorbed into what we might call the Judean polity, the Judeans eventually absorb some of these behavior patterns. They start to see, when in the Roman period, puncturing of vessels for the reasons delineated in the Mishnah, or they start to use ritual baths. And these things, I think, are a reflection of something very human. And that is that people, let's say, assimilate not one direction, it is bilateral. We will absorb some of their behavioral modes, and they obviously will absorb some of ours. There will be very little reference in Idumean Jewish sources to their original god Kos. I'm not saying it's eliminated completely, but in the Roman period, it's very rare. They clearly accept the Judean god. Yahweh will be accepted, but they will continue to do these different practices that they had been doing for, I'd say, at least centuries.
Fascinating. And so it reminds me that, for example, Bernie Alpert, Zichrono Livracha, and Fran Alpert, when they would talk about the dig, they would always use the image of the peeling of the onion. And that's really what you're suggesting, that it's really uncovering piece by piece, shard by shard, room by room. This is the beauty of Dig for a Day, but there's always more questions, more to search, more to research. And this is really what you're doing in your work now, trying to take everything that's been collected there, to analyze it, and based on that, in a Sherlock Holmes way, put it together and tell the story. And you're doing that in written form, you're doing that in international journals, you're doing that at conferences all over the world. So in that sense, every group that comes out to the dig site is contributing their piece or their shard to this larger work.
Well, for me, there's a lot of, I would say, satisfaction that I get from the fact that everything that I've spoken about just now, and everything that we display, everything that I'm publishing, all of this stuff is more or less a result of the work from people who came on Dig for a Day. I know that, again, some people say it's like fishing in a barrel, but bottom line is they are actually uncovering material from an ancient, let us say, cosmopolitan city that was a reflection of different ethnic groups and how they interacted. And the interaction basically gives us a sense of not only who they were, but also who we are. And it's to say that we are really, well, to quote Ecclesiastes, I would say, and this is something I feel after 30 years of excavating, there is really nothing new under the sun.
And let's maybe take that for a second and dig into that point, excuse the pun. Your background is so much in education, and formal education, and experiential education all throughout the years. And in a way, Dig for a Day was built out of that meeting between archaeological research and experiential ed. Today, when we look at education, it's so much about numbers, about finance, about business, about hard, so-called hard sciences, and things like archaeology, history, literature, languages sometimes get a short shift. Why is it so important for Jews and for all of us to be involved in these kinds of topics and to value archaeology and what it might open up for us about who we are, as you're suggesting?
Well, I would say that for me, many times when I started excavating, I would say that I got tremendous satisfaction out of finding things that connected me to my past, connected me to my identity. These things were very, very significant. Today, I would say those are significant, but it's also much more complex. In other words, I know that, for example, I remember being on television on one channel, and we found the largest archive ever be found in Israel, a private archive with 1,200 ceilings, bulot. I showed photos of these different Hellenistic gods, and the interviewer said, yeah, but isn't there anything Jewish here? And I was shocked by his question because what we were looking at here was an interaction of cultures. Yes, I was showing these different images of Apollo and of Zeus and other Greco-Roman or really Greek gods at the time. But at the same time, had he asked me, and he didn't, what else is there? And I would say, well, there's also what we call aniconic images. What is an aniconic image? It's really a symbol, a line, some sort of a dot, which was a way of many peoples, the Jews included, let's say, represented their God in a non-image, let's say, manner.
What we might call abstract art today.
Abstract art at that time, and we see it among the Jews, we see it among the Idumeans, we see it among the Nabateans, and again, this is part of things that are not black and white. Everything is nuanced, and if we look at things or we try to see things only in black and white terms, we're missing the boat. I believe that when we look at the past, we have a better understanding of who we are. We have a better understanding of even where we could possibly go. We can also understand the mistakes that were made and possibly learn from those mistakes. So I think it's essential as human beings to look at the past, to look at literature, ancient literature and modern literature, and also look at, let's say, the artifacts that are coming out of the ground that also reflect how people were feeling, what people were thinking at that period of time, because again, it gives us insight into ourselves as well.
Dr. Ian Stern, thanks for joining us. Thanks for having this conversation. And for those of you who are listening, we are certainly looking forward to having you out at Dig for a Day when you travel with J Squared Adventures, like all the time. Whether you're here with us in Israel or at our international destinations, I think Ian's point about creating a sense of the story where we can see ourselves in the mirror and connect personally with these questions of identity, of meaning, that's what it's all about. Enjoy. Ian, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.